Welcome to this pronunciation video with me, Ollie. Today I want to look at something which is very difficult for so many people, and understandably, because the spelling can be very confusing when it comes to pronouncing the final sound, and it can be difficult to figure out what to do. But hopefully I can give you some tips here which you can then take on and use to figure it out yourself. So the first thing I should say is there are 3 different ways to pronounce this ending of ed. So you can either end in a t, you can end in a d, or you can end in an id. And I'll tell you why we do it in different ways if you're not sure of this. So hopefully it'll be really useful. So the first one I'll talk about is ending in just the regular T, so T. When we have an unvoiced ending to the word, so say talk, so that final K, there's no voice here, K, K. If you compare that to G, that's voiced, K is not voiced. So it's followed by T, which is also not voiced. So you say talked, talked, talked. And that just makes it a bit easier rather than trying to say like talked. You don't need to add an extra sound, and sometimes that can make it sound unclear. So just talked. Another example, convince. So that ends in a convince. Can you feel any voice there? Convince. So that sound doesn't have any voice. Convince. So you again say t, convinced, convinced, st, rather than convinced or convinced, which I sometimes hear. Now let's move on to d. So this d is a bit softer when it comes at the end of the word, and because this word is voiced, d. Sorry, this sound is voiced, d. Then it naturally follows another voiced sound before it. So, like with t, you did unvoiced, unvoiced. With d, voiced, voiced is usually what happens. So, for example, if you said message, message, j, j, this j is voiced, message. So then you would use the d, which is voiced, messaged, messaged, rather than like messaged or messaged, messaged, jd. Another example could be, say, if you want to use DM as a verb, he DM'd me, DM'd me. So DM is voiced, so you would follow it with the d, DM'd, DM'd. And again, a bit softer than when it comes at the start of the word, DM'd. Okay, so that's t and d endings. And now the third ending, which is kind of maybe overused a bit actually, and actually only really follows 2 sounds. So if the word ends in a t sound or a d sound, the 2 sounds I've just focused on, if it ends in either of those, then you'd say id, or sometimes ud, id, ud. So the example I've got here is crowd, ends in a d, crowd, crowded, id, crowded. So you just add on an id when it ends in a t or a d. So crowded, meditated, id, meditated. So let's use some of these in a sentence now that we've got these three. So the first one, I talked with you yesterday. I talked with you yesterday. I talked with you yesterday. She just messaged me. She just messaged me. Messaged me. And the id example, this morning I meditated for 10 minutes. I meditated for 10 minutes. Meditated. Let me know of any more examples you want to put in the comments, and see if you can figure out some examples if this is something that you find difficult. Don't worry, because it's confusing sometimes with the spelling, but just if you remember, you don't need to kind of add any extra sounds other than that ending and the sound before it. So you don't need to kind of add an extra schwa there sometimes, which I hear. Talked, you don't need to say talked, talked, just talked. If it's unvoiced, unvoiced. If it's voiced, voiced. If it ends in a T or a D sound, then id. Hopefully this was useful. Let me know, and please share it with a friend or tag a friend if you found